Today I'd like to share a case with you from our partial denture department, and this is something that we see pretty commonly when we've got a patient who's got a couple of ERA attachments in their mouth connected to some crowns, and then we're going to make a partial denture for them. So if you can picture this being in the patient's mouth and not on a model, we've got these two ERA eyelets where these are attached directly to the crowns in front of them, and now it's time to take an impression of this so we can send this to the laboratory and they can pour up a model like this one. And so there's three ways dentists usually attempt to take this type of impression. Two of them don't work very well, and one of them works really well. So the first way would be just to try to take a polyvinyl impression of these eyelets the way they are right here. So the dentist would simply syringe some polyvinyl siloxane material, some light body material, around the eyelets, and his assistant would fill the tray with, say, a heavy body, seat it down onto the model, and take it out. And that's a difficult way to do it because the impression material gets stuck around the eyelet and will tear, and we really don't get a very good relationship when that just gets done. The second way we'll see dentists try to do it is to use the ERA cap itself, and oftentimes they will seat the black cap into the eyelet and then take an impression just like that, with obviously a cap over on this side as well. And then when we get it in the laboratory, we hook our analog to that cap, and then we seat that into the impression to pour the impression. But let me show you what that looks like. In fact, I'll show you on this case itself. So here is the impression for that case that the doctor sent in to us that we made this model from. And so what we're left with is trying to seat this transfer cap down into the area of the polyvinyl siloxane impression. I'll just set that in there. And then when we go to put our lab analog on top of that, what I want you to notice is that we really do not have a great fit once I get this into place. So the analog is in place, but you'll notice when I just stick my finger on here, you can see how easily it wiggles back and forth. And that's seated all the way in that polyvinyl siloxane. But you'll notice that there's not a lot of impression material around that analog. Obviously it wasn't present when the impression was taken. And because all we have is some polyvinyl around that black cap, you can see that it's really, really very loose. And so we end up guessing when we pour this up in a stone model. In fact, just pouring the stone or setting this impression on the vibrator itself can cause that to move back and forth. And as a result, when we actually pour this model up as we have here, it may turn out when we look and sight down here or sight it from the sides that it's not the proper angle. That might be tilted back too far to the distal in relationship to that crown. And so now we can make a partial denture based on these ERA eyelets, and then it won't fit when the doctor takes it to the mouth and tries it in. And so we look at this, and it's kind of a crapshoot whether or not we're going to have a very accurate partial when it gets back to you and you try it into the patient's mouth. So let me show you a better way to do this, one that we found to work pretty much every time. This is a different full arch polyvinyl impression from a doctor who's again utilizing two ERA attachments on an upper partial. And I want you to notice the difference on this one. You can see the lab analog here, and when I put my finger on it this time and try to wiggle it, it goes nowhere. I get no movement mesial distal. I get no movement buccal lingual as I push down on it and try to move it. It is really stuck in there solid. And so because we have no movement here, when it comes time to fabricate the model for this doctor with the ERA attachments, we have a high degree of restorative success when we do it this way, and we're pretty sure that those ERA attachments are in the right position. So let's take a step back and look at that other model and show you the best way to actually do this. Now, even though this was the model from the other case, it's just going to be a little easier to illustrate here. So I'll go ahead and place the cap here into the eyelet as we would in the patient's mouth and make sure that is seated all the way down. And you hear that click. There's always a little click as that goes into place. And again, that's a difficult way to take the impression with just this cap, because the way it clicks into the eyelet, it's not going to come out in the pickup impression. And that's why it has to be taken out and then reseated in the impression, but it still never fits very tightly. So this is the impression coping from Stern Gold, available through the lab or on their website. It's only $35, and it's not like you have to buy one of these every time you do a new case. And you'll be able to see why this gets indexed so well. In fact, this is how that doctor with a successful impression was able to get that successful impression. You can see the base of it has one of the removable black caps in it. And then the rest of this impression coping is indexed, and it's going to get stuck into the polyvinyl material itself. So let's go ahead and place it onto the eyelet as though we were doing it in the patient's mouth. And we'll snap it down into place. And you can see now, as I rotate this up, that it's on there. It's like a fence post in concrete. It is not moving. It's not going anywhere. It is absolutely locked onto that. And now when we take our pickup impression, the polyvinyl material is going to encase this absolutely completely. And because of the flat edges that we have on the sides of this, we're going to be able to index this back in the laboratory. So when you do a pickup impression and pull this off, even if it doesn't come off and we have to stick it back into the impression ourselves, we know exactly where it goes because of the flat side on this impression coping. And that gives us about a 99.9% chance of making sure that your ERA attachments on the model that we make from you are going to be accurate and give you the best chance of having an accurate partial that snaps right into the patient's mouth. So again, rather than taking an impression of the eyelets themselves or just trying to pick up the cap, the use of an impression coping like this gives you your best chance of restorative success.